Congestion, long commutes, and hazardous driving conditions. This is the Sea to Sky Highway connecting Metro Vancouver to the village of Whistler after $1 billion was invested to make it safer for the 2010 Winter Olympic Games. But despite all the investment, no robust transit network that connects the population centers along the highway exists.
Years ago, anytime there was a transit discussion, there was talk about how do we drag people out of their vehicles and get them to make more trips in transit.
We also know that transportation can be a barrier, a social barrier for many people.
It's becoming harder and harder to tolerate, honestly.
So what's the solution? Delivering regional public transit. The Sea to Sky Highway serves rapidly growing towns and Indigenous communities, including the three major population centers of Squamish, Whistler, and Pemberton. All three of these areas have grown more than 20% since the 2016 census and are expected to expand by another 50% by 2046. This increased growth has brought in tons of economic activity to the region. From skiing in the winter to mountain biking in the summer, the Sea to Sky corridor has seen a massive influx of travelers going up and down this scenic route. This, of course, meant increased congestion, hours-long traffic delays, and tons of pollution. Many of the cars going back and forth on the highway are people making their daily commutes, including from Squamish and Pemberton to Whistler and vice versa, and for seniors trying to get to specialist appointments in Vancouver, or for young people who don't own a car and need to visit the city. This region is in dire need of better transit to connect the already existing and well-integrated BC Transit regional networks of Squamish, Whistler, and Pemberton. Since the discontinuation of the Greyhound bus service in 2018, the only buses that now make the trip are shuttle services from YVR to Whistler or from downtown to the Sea to Sky gondola. And while this works for many tourists, it doesn't serve residents along this route with viable public transit options to substitute car dependency. Now, you may not know this, but this region was well connected in the past with commuter trains of BC Rails. You used to be able to easily get on a train in North Vancouver and go up to Horseshoe Bay, Squamish, and all the way to Lillooet and Prince George. Unfortunately, back in 2003, the provincial government sold the majority of BC Rail's assets to CN Rails in a bid process that was fraught with controversy, but that's a topic for another video. The passenger train services were discontinued shortly thereafter. When the Greyhound bus service was discontinued in 2018, the federal government offered to match funding to sustain the routes that the Greyhound bus services used to serve, but the BC government declined the offer for the Sea to Sky corridor, only taking up the offer on 4 routes in the north of BC, which then created the BC Bus North Network. A proper, government-funded, inter-regional public transit system that offers regular, reliable service connecting Metro Vancouver to Squamish, Whistler, and Pemberton would not only reduce the congestion on the road, but would also better connect the underserved communities, especially Indigenous peoples, youth, and senior residents, to the facilities in Squamish and the much larger Vancouver region without the need for a personal vehicle or a driver's license.
Pemberton is not super remote, but we are a small community and we are the hub for many smaller communities and rural areas when folks come into Pemberton and we need to get them to those medical services. We also know that transportation can be a barrier, a social barrier for many people. Depending on cars is not a reality for many folks. They don't have the ability to own and drive a car, and so for them, again, in more remote areas with higher needs, with accessibility issues, regional transit is an absolute must for that.
But ultimately, this is about freedom. Having the option to take public transit is both good for the environment and local economies. Studies show that every dollar spent on transit brings in $4 in return. $2 in direct spending benefits and $2 from the long-term cost savings associated with reduced congestion, commute times, and infrastructure upkeep needed for expensive multi-lane highways. Not Just Bikes goes into extensive detail on how North American urban sprawl literally bankrupts cities in the US and Canada. Better transit infrastructure allows us to reduce our reliance on car infrastructure, which in turn makes for better land use and more economically sustainable cities. So what would a better transit system here look like? Disappointingly for now, there are no plans to connect Metro Vancouver to Whistler with high-speed rail despite the seriously detailed Mountain Valley Express study. Side note, leave a like and comment if you're interested in seeing a video on that, and share this video with the community. It's word-of-mouth referrals like this that help the channel grow and help us invest more to highlight key issues just like this. Interregional transit can be made up of a robust intercity bus network, even if it doesn't sound as sexy as high-speed rail. And in fact, a 2017 BC Transit study into developing an express bus service connecting the North Shore with Squamish, Whistler, and Pemberton along this corridor showed a significant latent demand, meaning that as soon as the service is implemented, it would serve close to 1,000 people daily, accounting for the population increase in the region over the past 7 years.
Now I hear quite regularly from people that they have an expectation that they should be able to move around in this way without having to either own a vehicle or drive it as much. You know, maybe you still have a vehicle, but you can achieve more of your trips through a transit system. And that's true in our internal system, and we're working hard to increase that, but there's just this void on the regional side.
Community members would be much more likely to ditch the car and to get on board transit both literally and figuratively if reliable, high-frequency transit is implemented. And this is one of the reasons why the SkyTrain network sees such high ridership rate, thanks to the high-frequency trains leaving every 2 to 3 minutes during peak demand. Check out RM Transit's video on this topic. So the plan calls for initial service making 6 round trips from Whistler to Vancouver during weekdays and an additional 2 round trips added to the 4 existing ones between Pemberton and Whistler. While the services are divided between standard and express routes, the general stop structure would look like this. Connections to the ferry terminal at Horseshoe Bay also provides better mobility between the communities on the Sunshine Coast, Vancouver Island, and the Sea to Sky corridor. So what's keeping us from getting good transit implemented along the corridor?
Well, the holdup with the regional transit really comes down to funding and what that looks like from the provincial perspective. There's a rather hefty motor fuel tax that gets paid to TransLink in Metro Vancouver that isn't part of our price of fuel in the Sea to Sky corridor. And I think it's around 18 cents a liter, but often the fuel is more expensive here than it is in Vancouver. So the fuel surcharge that's being charged in Vancouver and metro area to support their services there essentially sets the price for fuel. And we're paying that price here, but we're not seeing the benefit of that as a community with an investment in regional transit. So to me, the starting point is that motor fuel tax to be able to access some funding to get it off the ground. But we also can't see a jump in fuel pricing.
The federal government can play a key role in funding capital for projects like this, because over the last 9 years, the Government of Canada has invested over $30 billion in public transit projects, which is 10 times more than the previous Conservative government invested. And on top of that, we just announced another $30 billion for public transit fund over the next 10 years to provide predictable, reliable, long-term capital funding for transit projects that help meet the need for our increased population. And normally funding for operation of transit would be split about 50-50 between municipalities and the provincial government. And your local representatives have been advocating for this project for a long time. So if you want to see this project happen, I suggest that you please write to Premier David Eby and the Transportation Minister, Rob Fleming. And I'm including the respective contact information below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this and help us spread the word on more crucial issues that affect our communities. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.